Transport and distribution planning in a Trump world. Let's start off by setting the stage. What is transport and distribution planning? Why does it even matter? And how has Trump influenced businesses to change their ways through new policies? Transport and distribution planning is a process of design, how goods move from suppliers to manufacturers, to warehouses to customers. It involves decisions about when, where and how to best move these goods. For example, ships, planes, trucks and trains. How do we route them? Where do we locate warehouses and how much inventory do we hold? Good planning will perfectly balance cost, speed, risk and reliability. For businesses with global supply chains, transport planning is especially important. It's not all about getting goods cheaply, it's also about ensuring resilience. As you can imagine, in a constantly changing environment of policies and regulations, planning becomes even more complex. Now, why are these policies so important? Decisions made by governments, especially trade policies, can reshape costs and risks. When tariffs go up or trade agreements change, it's not just the price of goods that change. It's the whole logistics network that has to adapt. Under the Trump administration, several trade and tariff policies had major implications for transport and distribution planning. We all heard about Trump's tariffs on goods imported from China. He called them reciprocal tariffs, linking the new U.S. tariffs to similar tariffs imposed by other countries on U.S. exports, creating a tit-for-tat tariff war and creating uncertainty for global trading. Critical industries such as semiconductors, rare earth minerals, shipbuilding and pharmaceuticals were in focus. Let's see how these policies affect transport and distribution planning and its impact on different modes of transport. Maritime shipping boats. Higher tariffs meant certain imported goods are more expensive, leading to a reduction in container volume. Container shipping from China after Trump's tariffs was hit hard. Trucks and trains. Although these are usually domestic modes of transport, they were affected directly by the tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum, used to build trucks and rails, which slowed investment into infrastructure. Air freight. Planes were never directly targeted in these tariffs, but the uncertainty and cost pressures on businesses reduced just-in-time shipments by air and forced businesses to reconsider strategies. Tariffs and their impact on supply chains. The Trump administration has been pushing for higher tariffs on imports, especially from certain trade partners. In some cases, tariffs could go as high as 20% on all imports, and even higher on specific products. The goal is to incentivize companies to move manufacturing back to the US, which in turn would increase demand for domestic warehousing and logistics services. But these tariffs also come with higher costs for imported goods, which can drive up prices for consumers and put tighter margins on companies throughout the supply chain. Policy shifts and regulatory changes. Trade policy under Trump is now a major factor shaping global supply chains. One big change is the end of the de minimis duty-free exemption. Since August 29, 2025, even small packages valued under $800 are no longer exempt from customs duties. What used to be a quick, low-friction process for millions of e-commerce shipments now requires full customs entry, detailed invoices, accurate product classification, and proof of value. That's a lot more work for logistics providers and importers. At the same time, the US has introduced steep fees for Chinese-built ships entering American ports. Ships that have a significant proportion of Chinese-built components could face multi-million-dollar charges at each port call. The goal is to encourage more US-built shipping capacity, but it has big implications for global shipping companies and the flow of goods across supply chains. Impact on international versus domestic transport. These regulatory shifts are changing how goods move both internationally and within the US. International shipping is becoming more complicated and expensive. With the de minimis exemption gone, even small packages require full customs processing, which slows deliveries and increases administrative work. Ocean carriers now have to deal with higher costs from the new port fees on Chinese-built vessels, and that could make them rethink how often they call at US ports or which ports they serve. Some analysts warn this could shift global trade patterns and create congestion at certain terminals. On top of that, container arrivals at US ports are expected to drop as tariffs bite. Domestically, we're seeing a shift toward relying more on US-based logistics infrastructure. Companies are starting to consider reshoring or nearshoring production to reduce dependence on imports. That's driving more demand for US trucking, rail networks, warehouses, and regional distribution centers. Smaller ports are feeling the impact too. Some shippers are skipping them in favor of larger hubs, which changes how goods are distributed across the country. Challenges for companies. For businesses, these changes are creating real challenges. Costs are going up, not just from tariffs, but also from inspections, paperwork, and added compliance. The removal of the de minimis exemption hits e-commerce businesses and smaller importers especially hard because they used to rely on frequent, low-value shipments to stay competitive. There's also a big administrative burden. Companies need to rethink supply chain flows, decide whether to hold more inventory, and sometimes switch to regional or domestic suppliers to reduce risk. On top of that, shipping itself is becoming less predictable. Carriers might reroute or reduce port calls to avoid the new fees on Chinese-built ships, which can lengthen delivery times and create bottlenecks. And planning long-term investments, like new warehouses or reshored production, becomes harder when trade policy can change quickly. Strategic implications and outlook. Overall, Trump's policies are pushing supply chains to become more regional and domestic. Making international shipping more expensive and complicated encourages companies to produce and distribute more locally. That increases the need for US-based logistics infrastructure, but it also means businesses have to accept trade-offs. They get more resilience and reduce exposure to global risks, but they may give up some cost advantages from global sourcing. At the same time, the added regulatory burden from customs compliance, documentation, and duties is pushing companies to invest in trade compliance systems, strengthen relationships with logistics partners, and improve forecasting. For businesses that can adapt, this is an opportunity to build stronger, more flexible, and more politically insulated supply chains. For others, though, failing to adjust could mean tighter margins, slower deliveries, and increased risk. In a Trump world, companies had to rethink how their supply chains were structured. Tariffs, political uncertainty, and shifting trade policies pushed businesses to redesign how they sourced products and moved goods. One of the biggest adjustments was a shift in strategy. Many companies began nearshoring, moving production closer to the US, especially to Mexico, to avoid tariffs and reduce shipping time. At the same time, they started diversifying their supplier base through the China Plus One strategy, adding production in places like Vietnam or India so they weren't dependent on a single country. Warehousing strategies also changed. Instead of relying on very lean, just-in-time systems, companies increased inventory and built or expanded warehouses in the US and along the border. Overall, the goal became building a more resilient and flexible supply chain. These strategy shifts had a direct impact on distribution centers. As supply routes changed, companies needed DCs in new locations. Many expanded or built centers near major ports, inland freight hubs, and along the southern border to support increased trade with Mexico. Distribution centers also started holding more safety stock to protect against delays and rapid policy changes. Inside the facilities, operations modernized. Companies invested in automation, improved cross-docking, and created more regional distribution networks instead of relying on just a few national centers. This allowed them to adapt faster and keep products moving even when the global environment was unpredictable. Technology became the driving force behind all these adjustments. Real-time tracking and visibility tools helped companies manage cross-border transportation more accurately. Walmart, for example, used advanced tracking for shipments from Mexico. Amazon expanded robotics in its warehouses to handle rising inventory and speed up fulfillment. General Motors used network optimization software to redesign supply routes, while UPS and FedEx introduced digital customs tools to reduce delays at the border. These technologies gave companies the data, automation, and speed they needed to operate efficiently during uncertain trade conditions. Together, these shifts reshaped how companies designed their networks, transportation systems, and distribution strategies. By nearshoring production, diversifying suppliers, upgrading distribution centers, and relying more on technology, businesses were able to build supply chains that were stronger, more flexible, and better prepared for ongoing change. So, what have we learned from the shifts in transport and distribution planning during the Trump era? Starting with the lessons learned. The biggest takeaway for businesses was that global supply chains are far more fragile than they seemed. Tariffs, uncertainty, and policy swings exposed how dependent companies were on single-source manufacturing, especially China, and how easily transportation networks could be disrupted. Businesses learned that low cost is not the same as low risk, and resilience became just as important as efficiency. Now, on to the major challenges. Companies faced unpredictable tariff timelines, increased shipping costs, sudden rerouting needs, and delays at ports and border crossings. Maritime shipping volumes from China dropped, inland transport investment slowed due to steel and aluminium tariffs, and air freight experienced volatility as businesses tried to cut costs. Distribution centers struggled with rapid changes in demand, and long-term planning became extremely difficult because global rules could change overnight. Because of these challenges, companies adopted new future-facing strategies. They accelerated nearshoring, moving production closer to the US, particularly to Mexico. They diversified suppliers through the China Plus One strategy, spreading production across Vietnam, India, and other low-risk locations. Warehousing strategies shifted from just-in-time to just-in-case, with more stock held in US and border-adjacent facilities. Technology became essential. Everything from real-time tracking to robotics, automation, and advanced optimization tools helped companies stay flexible and maintain control over their networks. Before we wrap up, let's quickly highlight the before versus after. Before, global supply chains were optimized almost entirely for cost and speed. China acted as the central manufacturing hub, maritime shipping dominated long-haul transport, and distribution centers were designed for flow-through efficiency and minimal inventory. After, supply chains became multi-regional. Companies reduced dependency on China, expanded operations in Mexico and Southeast Asia, and built more resilient distribution networks with higher inventory. Technology turned into a strategic asset, supporting visibility, automation, and faster decision-making. Now, what does all this mean going forward? There are several recommendations companies can use to stay competitive in an unpredictable policy environment. 1. Increase supply chain visibility. Real-time tracking and predictive analytics reduce uncertainty and improve routing decisions when policies change suddenly. 2. Strengthen multi-country sourcing. Don't rely on one region even if it's currently low cost. Build in redundancy. 3. Invest in flexible distribution centers. Facilities should support automation, cross-docking, and rapid inventory repositioning. 4. Balance JIT with resilience. Strategic safety stock can prevent disruptions without overbuilding inventory. 5. Leverage nearshoring where it makes sense. Mexico, Latin America, and even US-based manufacturing can shorten lead times and reduce tariff exposure. Finally, let's look at the opportunities for growth. The shift in global trade has created new openings in North American manufacturing, especially in automotive, electronics, and consumer goods. Logistics providers can benefit by offering cross-border expertise, automation services, and digital customs solutions. Technology companies have huge opportunities to expand AI-driven forecasting, warehouse robotics, and network optimization tools. And as companies diversify their sourcing, emerging economies, particularly India, Vietnam, and parts of Latin America, can capture new manufacturing investments. In summary, the Trump-era tariff environment pushed global supply chains into a phase of reinvention. The companies that adapt, by diversifying, nearshoring, investing in technology, and building resilient networks, will be the ones best positioned to thrive in whatever comes next.